Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Black Mental Health Matters. I'm Dr. Kerry-Ann Williams. I'm a psychiatrist practicing here in Massachusetts, and this is a show that's about everything related to mental wellness in the Black community and beyond. Today, I'm covering part 2 of grief in children and adolescents. Earlier this year, I had a show, the part 1 of grief in children and adolescents. It was in about January. It was episode 2 of season 2. In that show, I spoke about how the past 2 years have been a time of loss for so many. The pandemic took the lives of parents, siblings, and other family members and friends. In addition to causing deaths, the pandemic caused other losses of finances and dreams. For individuals in the Black community, grief can be even deeper because racism leads to a disproportionate loss of lives, whether from pandemic-related reasons or shortened life expectancy or suicide or homicide. In my earlier show, I spoke about what grief is and how to recognize the signs of grief in children and adolescents. I spoke about how to talk to children about grief and practical things that can be done to help them. I also spoke a little bit about traumatic grief, which is prevalent in the Black community, where we have cumulative sources of grief. In researching the topic of grief, I got connected with the Lewis D. Brown Peace Institute and spoke with Mr. Lawrence Stevenson. I'm going to play the clip of that interview with you shortly. In addition, I connected with Jenny Kaplan, the founder and CEO of Jeff's Place, and I'll play the promo of Jeff's Place for you as well. And here in Massachusetts, there's also another resource. It's called the Children's Room. So to start off, I wanted to share the interview that I had with Mr. Lawrence Stevenson from the Lewis D. Brown Peace Institute. The Lewis D. Brown Peace Institute is located in Dorchester, Massachusetts, and it provides support to family members and friends who have lost a loved one to homicide. It was founded in 1994, and it provides trainings and support groups. And every year they hold the Mother's Day Walk for Peace. And this year it's going to be held on May 8th at 8 o'clock at Townfield Park in Dorchester, Massachusetts. So you can go to their website. It's Mother's Day Walk for Peace, and the 4 is the number 4, mothersdaywalkforpeace.org. And you can donate to that Mother's Day Walk. And now I'm going to play that clip of the interview for you. All right, everyone. So I have here with me Lawrence Stevenson. Lawrence Stevenson is a survivor support coordinator at the Lewis D. Brown Peace Institute. And in his work, basically in the days following a homicide, he meets with families to provide emotional and practical support. He's prepared to walk with them through their journey from crisis to healing to thriving. And Lawrence believes that people have an incredible ability to heal. And he sees it as his role, not just to heal others, but to create a safe space in which people can heal themselves. He particularly appreciates facilitating what's known as peace play in urban settings. And he supports survivors in the process of constructing worlds out of sand and figurines. In 2015, he received a Bachelor's of Science in Psychology and Public Services from the Commonwealth Honors at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, or UMass Amherst. In addition to the work that he does at the Lewis D. Brown Peace Institute, he's also a trained diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant with Visions Incorporated Power to the People. So thank you for joining me today, Lawrence, for this interview.
Thanks for having me here.
So what is the Lewis D. Brown Peace Institute?
So the Peace Institute is a center for teaching, learning, and healing for families and community who have lost loved ones to murder, trauma, grief, and loss. We're an organization with a vision to create and sustain an environment where all families can live in peace and can be valued in this world. We're really a pioneer for changing society's response to homicide and supporting families, regardless of the circumstances surrounding their loss. We really just want to show families love, pull them in, and give them a platform for them to heal and for them to be.
Oh, and so how did you come to be involved with the Peace Institute? Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, thank you. So, I actually started with the Peace Institute, or got involved with the Peace Institute, not first as a survivor support coordinator, which is my role, but as a survivor myself. In 2017, my brother, Brent Randy Stevenson, we call him Randy, was killed. And the Peace Institute was so instrumental to my family's healing process, and really, brought us in, and, showed us a path, a way forward. And I was incredibly moved, by the Peace Institute and the folks who were able to support me and support my mother, and my father. And I was like, I need to be here. And so, you know, and I knew I wanted to get involved in some way. So, one day I was just looking through the Peace Institute website, and, there was a job description, for the role of survivor support coordinator. And sometimes you see things and you're like, wow, like that is what is meant for me. That was here for me, and I applied, and the rest is history. Yeah.
Like, grief is such a difficult subject to talk about. I even found myself kind of procrastinating a little bit on focusing on grief on the podcast. And then when I was ready to talk about grief, I found it difficult to find a community provider that would be familiar with the needs of the Black community. Um, and so I was really excited to learn of the Peace Institute. Many of us kind of think of grief as universal, and there are many aspects about grief that are, kind of universal to all people, but there are also some aspects of grief that are unique to the Black community.
Mm,
And research shows that children, in particular in the Black community, face the loss of a parent or a sibling at a higher rate than other groups. And that's not accounting for the other kinds of losses of like extended family and community members. And there's just so many complex psychosocial reasons that children face more losses and that people in the Black community face a lot of losses. Tell us a little bit about, in the support work that you do and the things that you've seen. What are some of the things that make grief a bit different in the Black community? What are some of those unique needs?
mm, mm, mm. Yeah, I think, that's a great question. So, the first thing that comes into my mind is just the relentlessness and the perpetual nature of grief. You know what I mean? It's like, I feel like, as Black people, and at least in the community I come from, I can only speak from my community. It's almost like grief never stops. You don't get to, grieve a loved one before somebody else passes. There's just so much loss, and I think that, that's something that makes it different. Is just like, we never really get to step out of that cycle, of grief, and, you know and when I say that, and also, like, the grief is traumatic loss, right? So, a lot of times, and, the kind of traditional thought about grief is, we get, or loss is, we get to see someone live out their life, um and, they live a productive life, and they have a legacy, and they pass. um and a lot of the loss that, we see in our community is traumatic loss, right? Is homicide, is suicide, is a lot of overdose, and people are losing their loved ones, before, their time. And in addition to that, even if it's not like, you know the traditional sense of traumatic loss, like homicide, um, you know the loss even we see from years of systemic pressures, right? Like, let's say somebody, grew up in a food desert, right? And, um, their eating habits were based on what they had access to eat in their community, right? And now we're losing them to heart disease, right? We're losing them to diabetes, right? Even those losses are traumatic, and we don't always think about those as traumatic losses, right? Um, and and even when I think about grief and loss, it doesn't even have to be loss of people, right? Our loved ones, but as Black people, we are always, there's so much loss due to systemic pressures, right? Like, watching folks, um, you know, get pushed out of their communities, right? Like hunger often feels like loss, when you're in poverty, right? If you work at a job, right, and or if you're applying for a job and you lose out on that job because your name on the application might not be Scott or Sarah, no, that those loss of opportunities, that's losses that we all have to grieve.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's exactly right. I think people sometimes, I think it's the cumulative nature of you just can't win sometimes. You just feel like you can't get a break. You're grieving one thing and then something else comes up, and it's like this sense of, the disparity, the unfairness,
Right.
on top of everything else.
Right. It never ends, and and I think that, that's why, I think also grief, like, I mean, I think it looks like also us holding each other, right? And I think that's what we also see in our communities, is people really wrapping each other around and loving each other.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you mentioned this idea of traumatic grief.
Hmm.
And I imagine that this can also lead to a complex grief reaction. Sometimes
Mm,
the way people express grief might be different, or the way that they, kind of live out their grief. Sometimes people may not even realize that what they're experiencing is a grief reaction. And we had kind of spoken about this a little bit earlier about um, the sometimes what can happen is the way that a person dies, the way that they dies, can influence the perception of the people around them and the kind of support they get. So if someone dies and it's something related to homicide, or it's related to gang involvement, or something like that, sometimes people have a negative comments, or they have their opinions, or sometimes there's even a lack of compassion or sympathy. um, and given the work that the Peace Institute does, and the work that you do with working with families in just days after a homicide, tell us a little bit about the challenges that families can face when their loved ones die in certain situations.
Yeah, I mean, I think that homicide is still, so stigmatized for families. And, you know, it on the just the interpersonal level, survivors hear things like, you always know, Joey was in the streets, you know what I mean? Or, even things that are well intended, like, you know he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, right? But if this young person was in their own community, they weren't in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were exactly where they were supposed to be, right? Um, these are really harmful, narratives, that families face, about, you know, the life of their loved ones, and regardless of the circumstances, right? Families, no matter how their loved one lived their life, are left to grieve them, and are left to, move their legacy forward, right? So we believe, no matter the circumstances, that all families, are deserving of dignity, compassion, and respect. Yeah. Um, and then it also makes me think about, like, there are even systemic level ways that, families are stigmatized, right? After the loss of homicide. So, in the victim compensation clause, there was there was a piece in there that said if families were if somebody was a what's the language of it? It's like if somebody was a victim of their own demise, that the families wouldn't get the victim compensation money, right? But we worked to, rally survivors together to pass legislation so that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And there's still legislation like that we're trying to pass so all families can be treated with dignity, compassion, and respect, regardless of the circumstances of the loss.
That's incredible that they actually had language kind of saying something about basically they say it's of their own demise. They're kind of I guess they're including things like suicide or things like being in situations like violence, that they're kind of like, well, your families won't have any benefits, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, like even so, there's a lot of talk about this, the gang list right now, right? So if someone dies from homicide and they're on that gang list, right? The police department's, gang list, that might be, that in the past might be something that is looked at in the investigation if they get the family's got those victim compensation resources, or
Oh.
if they had, drugs, in the car at the time, right? And the the police flipped it as a drug deal gone wrong, or something like that, right?
Mhm.
These families wouldn't get the resources, and it's like families are still left to grieve and to bury their loved ones, regardless of any of that.
Wow. One of the concepts that we kind of talked about a little bit too was this idea that if families get the dignity and compassion and respect that they deserve, that it can also reduce the cycle of retaliation and violence. Because especially
Mm,
if someone loses their loved one to homicide, there's sometimes this feeling of like needing, I guess, to kind of closure on or needing for there to be justice. There's kind of a need for justice. And tell us a little bit about that.
yeah, I mean, so families, they when they lose their loved ones, they're angry, and oftentimes they're not having their experiences validated, right? They're not having a place that they can go to and say, like, this is the worst thing that could happen to you. This is the hardest days of your life, and let us give you love, right? So they're left just to sit and stir with that anger, mixed with, like, a lot of the young men I work with are receiving those messages like you should retaliate, right? But when we can really bring families in, and be able to sit them down and say, you don't have to go through this alone, like, you know, if you need to scream, if you need to get out your anger, like, do that here. And when families can get that compassion, that it lessens the need for retaliatory violence. And I don't even mean retaliatory violence just in like retaliating against other people, but even like internal retaliation, right? Even like, when we can give families, the love that they need, like, they might drink less or like harm their bodies in other ways, right? um yeah, so families need an outlet, a healthy outlet to express that anger, and express that grief in a way that is held.
It's an excellent point that the anger and the kind of response may not necessarily be towards other people. It could be towards himself, and they may be kind of doing things that are self-destructive. And
Right.
people on the outside may not even realize what's going on. We kind of talked a little bit about this too, like what does traumatic grief look like? Sometimes it can look like changes in a person's external behaviors. It can look like people starting to become an alcoholic, or something like that, or their personality changing. What are maybe a few things that you've seen as people may not realize it's a reaction to grief, but it really is. People might just attribute it to, oh, that person just has bad choices in life or bad behavior, but
Mm,
really complex grief reaction. What are some things you've seen?
yeah, so I mean, I think the drinking, the definitely the smoking, like the substance use, or like the need to kind of want to numb, selectively numb. I mean, I think that is very common. We hear it a lot we hear it a lot in rap songs. You know what I mean? I was talking to a young man about that the other day. He said he's been smoking more, and I was like, well, let's talk about why that is. It's the pain. Um, I think it often also looks like, you know, um, might look like symptoms of like a personality disorder or like borderline personality disorder, right? Where folks are, you get somebody stabilized, and then they go in cycles of destabilization. So it's like, people kind of blame people, like, oh, I supported you, and we were able to get you housing, or we're able to get you counseling, right? But you're not showing up to counseling, right? But when a symptom of this traumatic grief, and complex trauma could be just this constant destabilization.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, the Peace Institute, what are some of the principles that they will help families with? What are some of the things that they kind of, I guess, will kind of work through? I know, I wonder if things like forgiveness, or tell me a little bit about what some of the concepts are of the Peace Institute.
Yeah, we have our principles of peace, our 7 principles of peace, and these are the guiding principles our organization stands on, which are love, faith, unity, hope, courage, justice, and forgiveness. Um, we believe that these are, what people need to live peaceful lives and to be able to heal. And if you embody these principles, in the embodiment of these principles, you're on your path to healing. And I say path to healing, because we know, there's no end point, right? There's no end point of healing, right? But healing is a journey. So these are the steps that we take along the journey. And for example, one that stands out for our survivors a lot is forgiveness. They see that on our walls, and they're like, oh, well, I'm not ready to forgive my loved one yet. And we say, yes, that's fair and that's valid. And forgiveness doesn't always mean, forgiving the person who murdered your loved one. That's a big step. Forgiveness might be, forgiving yourself, because you might have forgotten, the person's name that you usually remember and you used to sing every day, because the nature of trauma is it rewires your brain. So your memory's not the same, right? Or it might be, when we think about hope, it might be them, like being able to get out of bed one day and say, okay, well, today I got out of bed, and I'm feeling hopeful for that. And just helping survivors recognize those moments, those small moments, that we're able to utilize these principles and use them to get through. The pain, usually the pain doesn't usually a lot of times won't stop, but it's like, how can we live in our skin, how can we live in ourselves, you know in this new way, when the pain doesn't stop, but have some skills to be able to move through it anyway,
Yeah. So it's like
have the
these
courage to move
principles.
through it.
So these principles are it's not about kind of living them out perfectly. It's about finding those small moments where you can kind of have these things inside of you, those small moments of hope, those small moments of self forgiveness, those small moments of love, of joy. Um, and I imagine then that as a support, as kind of like a support coordinator, and you're able to kind of work alongside families with guiding them through these kinds of principles and how to live that out.
Right,
Mhm.
right, right.
I wanted to talk a little bit about what are some of the things that we need in the Black community to help with our grief, especially given that we experience more than other racial groups just as a whole? I mean, we have things like the Peace Institute, but just in general, what are some things that the Black community needs to kind of heal and to work through grief?
Mm. Yeah, I think we need, safe spaces, and safe healing spaces for, particularly affinity spaces for Black people to be able to grieve. I think that, we have many centers for grief that are often, outside of the city. Um, and we need, like, more centers, like the Peace Institute, um, you know, like Mothers for Justice and Equality within our communities, for families to be able to heal and work through their pain in a safe way. I think that, you know we need some addressing of the spiritual wellness in our communities. I think that this is constant, right? I think that this the pain is constant, and we just need that spiritual wellness. People need a chance just to be able to breathe and walk outside and get fresh air without feeling the fear, you know. Um, I think there needs to be an investment in counseling and education and healthcare programs to address the rising rates of homicide. Imagine what we could achieve if we taught our children how to address these root causes of homicide, through peace and healing in our schools, right? Um, I think we need to transform the narrative in our approaches, to interrupt crisis. I think we got to think about how media perpetuates violence. We need to think about how arts perpetuates violence and other forms of communication, and use those platforms as a ways of healing and a ways of families to be able to tell the stories, not only of the pain but of the healing, right? Of the lives that their loved ones lives, not just their deaths, right? We need opportunities to be able to do that, and I think we need to take. I think there needs to be kind of a collaboration with an elected officials, educators, community leaders, police officers, social workers, mental health and substance providers, even criminal justice professionals, um, you know, to come up with safe and coordinated, effective and coordinated processes for healing, um, that families can use to get the love and dignity they need to heal.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, one of the things that I'm kind of hearing is we need to talk about it. We need to
Right,
talk about, so the education, the kids need to be able to talk about it, to learn about it, to learn how to reduce, also to reduce kind of risk. So how to kind of talk about violence and things like that, but then also just how to talk about the experiences. Um, you know, so education and kind of like spaces. Um,
right.
yeah, yeah, and I also kind of wanted to note too. One of the things we kind of talked, and this one might be, potentially universal for a lot of people experiencing grief, but the idea of like reminders. That sometimes
Mm,
you may not realize why somebody's having a bad day, but it's because
right.
that day, something about that day reminds them of something, something that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think that something that separates homicide and traumatic grief from, this traditional narrative of what grief looks like oftentimes in, like, on TV, is that there's so many anniversary dates that for survivors of homicide, right? There's not like there's the death date, there's the birthday, which, if you lost a loved one, those dates are always hard. And then, though, you might have the day that there was the arrest was first made, right? You might have the day that the court case, the verdict of the court case was read, you know? Um, and so there becomes all these other uh, monuments of memory that you're sitting with, and they can bring up really hard things. So I think that people, I just think we need to talk about it more. We need to talk about how survivors of homicide are impacted in different ways than other forms of grief, and
Yeah.
have the psychoeducation to be for people to be able to understand their experiences, because their experiences might not look like the traditional narrative of what grief looks like.
So, tell us about what some of the things that the Peace Institute offers. What are some of the services and groups and things?
Yeah. So in my role, I see families in the first 24 to 72 hours after homicide, to walk them through the funeral and burial process. I might support them writing a media statement, or supporting them with the media statement, so they can address the media. A lot of families have a lot of nuanced needs. So let's say that they have loved ones in Haiti, and we need to partner with our Congresswoman's office to get emergency visas for families. So, kind of, we support them in managing crisis in this first 24 to 72 hours. But also, we move families from that place, and support them with their ongoing healing as well. So, we have a variety of different groups, like our healing and recovery group, where individuals can, talk on a weekly basis about their experience. This is not a clinical group necessarily, but just a community group where folks can come together and talk about what's true for them. We have mindfulness workshops, we have writers workshops, um, and we also have spaces in which people can take their pain and turn it into power by advocating for policy change, and being a part of our survivors network. Um, and we're also a training organization, right? So we have developed a comprehensive model for serving survivors in this first 24 to 72 hours. And we don't want to just like hold this knowledge for ourselves. We want to make sure that in every city, in every neighborhood, folks have our survivors of homicide burial guide, so they can be able to walk families through the process of burying their loved ones with dignity, compassion, respect. If even if we at the Peace Institute never get to see them. So if I kind of had to package it overall and what we do, we are creating a comprehensive and holistic network that promotes peace and resilience, and provides communities with the skills, tools to respond equitably and effectively to families dealing with murder, trauma, grief, and loss. And Yeah, we invite folks to continue to stay connected and get involved with us.
And then anything else? Anything else that we should know about the Peace Institute, or anything new, or anything that you guys are promoting now?
Yeah, so we have a few kind of newer initiatives where we're working right now. One is our Girls Leadership Academy, where we are providing young women with the opportunity to take their pain and turn it into power, by learning skills to advocate for legislative change, and working with government officials. Um, and also get some mentorship for their healing, and also programs to work on their healing as well. And May 8th, we have our big annual Mother's Day Walk for Peace fundraiser, and walk. This is like our big flagship event that we have annual basis. We're thinking it will be an in-person walk this year, and we're really excited to have people in a safe way, to be able to walk for peace. That is on May 8th. If you would like more information about it, you can check out Mother's Day Walk number 4peace.org, or check out our website at ldbpeaceinstitute.org.
All right. So, guys, you guys should definitely, for those of you out there listening, if you're able to join the Mother's Day Walk that's coming up on May 8th. And they can also donate as well, too. They can go to the website and donate,
Yes.
and that's welcome.
Yes, this is our biggest fundraiser of the year, and what's really beautiful about these funds is they're all unrestricted funds, right? So we can use it to support families in all the ways that they need to be supported. So please go to the website and donate.
So, guys, this is a cause that you want to be involved with. I think this is the kind of thing that we should be supporting in our community. As I said earlier, I was looking for, where are the resources for organizations that help to support the Black community with the kind of perpetual grief and loss that we deal with. And I was so excited to find that there was a Peace Institute. And I think this is a kind of cause that people should be supporting and promoting. So, Lawrence, I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for the Peace Institute. And I want to thank you so much for your time today. I want to thank you for taking the time out to meet with me, to answer the questions that I have, and to share with listeners, what's happening. And for those that may be listening that are not in Massachusetts or not in the Boston area, maybe you can even think about what the Peace Institute and what the Peace Institute is doing, and you connect with them, and maybe consider having something like this in your own area, kind of following the model. There's a lot of things to be gained from this conversation today. So thank you again. And hopefully we'll keep in communication and maybe be able to attend the Mother's Day Walk in May.
Please, we would be really excited to see you.
Okay, everyone. Now I wanted to share information about Jeff's Place. As I mentioned earlier, I spoke with the CEO and founder, Jenny Kaplan, who was generous enough to spend some time speaking with me by Zoom and answering all my questions. And Jeff's Place is a supportive community for children, teens, and families who are grieving the loss of loved ones. It was founded in 2010 and is currently located in Framingham, Massachusetts. You can go to their website, it's jeffsplace.org, and you can find more resources there. And so I'm going to play a clip for you that provides a great summary of their services.
Sometimes you have to sit in the mud, at times alone and at times together. Hi, I'm Jenny Kaplan, the founder and director of Jeff's Place Children's Bereavement Center in Framingham. We provide free support groups and community support for kids from preschool through high school whose parent or sibling have died. We also offer an online support group for grieving young adults ages 18 to 25, as well as an online grandparent loss group. In addition, we provide crisis intervention to schools, businesses, and communities after a death or in anticipation of a death. Our hope is to educate schools and communities on issues of childhood bereavement through trainings before a crisis. Finally, we developed the Inventory of Youth Adaptation to Loss, a strength-based tool that measures changes in child's communication, sense of social support, sense of connection, and social and emotional experiences of loss and resilience. Our vision is simple: no one grieves alone. Since 2000, the number of single-parent families in Metro West has increased. Single-parent families often experience more stress and economic strain than dual-parent households with two incomes. And for a parent who has been widowed, the toll on the surviving parent, as well as their children, is tremendous. Kids in these families can be at risk for poorer health and educational outcomes. The Metro West Adolescent Health Survey in 2015 indicated that 20 to 24% of middle and high school students in Framingham reported that they had experienced the death of someone close within the previous 12 months and that it impacted their daily functioning. That's a huge number of students and represents a desperate need for the youth of our community. A 2012 national poll of grieving youth indicated that 39% had trouble sleeping, 45% couldn't concentrate in school, and 41% put themselves at risk. Plain and simple, Jeff's Place is a prevention program. We believe that the expert on grief is the one who is grieving. We walk alongside our kids and families. Clearly, it is imperative that we continue to create awareness and create bold action to give voice to the prevalence and needs of grieving kids in Metro West and beyond. Here's our big idea. Sometimes you have to sit in the mud, at times alone and at times together. What I mean by that is opening ourselves to being vulnerable with ourselves and others opens doors to unlimited possibilities in every aspect of our lives. At Jeff's Place, we risk our insecurities by building trust, which empowers our participants to be vulnerable and ultimately to connect with others who get it. Building these connections is a lifeline for our families, and through each other, they find a haven of healing and hope.
We often say it's not about letting go, it's about finding new ways to hold on. And I think when you say that to the kids, you just can see this sigh of relief.
I was given a stone at the end of one of my Jeff's plantings, and it says hope for those here. And I keep that wherever I go. That's a really powerful thing for me.
And lastly, I wanted to mention the children's room. I reached out to them and they got back to me very quickly. They were the ones that actually connected me to the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute when I was trying to find grief support related organizations in the Black community. I connected with the program clinician intake and data coordinator, Caitlin Pillette, by email. The children's room, also referred to as TCR, is located in Arlington, Massachusetts, and it offers a safe, supportive community for children, teens, and families so that no one has to grieve alone. The Children's Room was founded in the 1990s, and it offers a variety of grief support services. So you can go to their website at childrensroom.org for additional resources as well. And that's it for my show today. What did you think? Drop a comment and join me again next week for Black Mental Health Matters with Dr. Kerry-Ann. Talk to you next.